when we're having this conversation in regards to addressing barriers to employment, especially for marginalized individuals, it's a grand conversation. It's a large one. We don't have too much time to cover all of the bases, so what we'll do is just really be able to touch point on, factors of the work that we're doing currently within the city of Hamilton. So within my role within Workforce Planning Hamilton, and it's something that we address at the table is connecting within our communities and being able to address this necessary changes that are happening within our economy on a day-to-day basis. And one of those pieces is being able to give opportunities to marginalized communities within our city, within Ontario, within Canada, within the world at this point, to be able to get the necessary jobs connecting with the people who are skilled and ready to be in the workforce, but also being able to address the necessary some of the barriers and the factors that go along with that. So when we talk about the challenges within and the barriers within the workforce, I really want us to take a moment to really close our eyes and think about the connections that are happening within our socioeconomic status, within our family push. I think that's a really big piece. And then, of course, being able to understand the backgrounds of family responsibility and overall education that go into the growth within our workforce. So one of the things that we have been doing within Workforce Planning Hamilton is being able to address all of the barriers that are going on within employment. So we look at race, we look at housing, we look at childcare, we look at all of these factors and how they're all interconnected to one another so that we can better address the situation and support not only our organization, but other organizations that are doing similar work in the city. So within our space, I'm also the vice chair of the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council, so AKA HIPSI. And we do a lot of great work with being able to address the international students in McMaster, Mohawk College, Redeemer College, as well as newcomers, and seeing where they really fit within our overall landscape. So one of the things that I was going to do today is really showcase a video of the work that we're doing, but what I'll do is just give a brief highlight of some of the pieces that we've currently been working on. So when I first started in this role during, 2021, I think, Vivian, at this time. So it was all remote. We were all really having a large conversation about the unemployment rate and where that goes. One of the pieces that I noticed was that youth were not a part of that conversation at all. It was a growing conversation about the unemployment rate, but we were not really looking at youth and how they really fit within the workforce ecosystem as a whole. So one of the things that we created was our Hamilton Youth Workforce. When we first started that conversation, we were like, okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get youth involved and we're gonna have them be, the leaders in this conversation. But I'm sure a lot of you have all kind of faced this issue within, especially throughout the pandemic, was how do we better connect with youth when they don't want to be a part of the conversation? Or if they do want to be a part of the conversation, they don't know where the conversations are happening to really make those connections. So one of the things we did was we moved away from trying to recruit youth, but we were trying to really be able to work with other organizations that had that connection, had that network within the youth realm to get them to be a part of the conversation. So one of the pieces that we did was we highlighted the programs that were happening, and we also highlighted the youth leaders that were working with youth on a day-to-day basis. And when I talk about youth, that's a big barrier within employment, right? We see that 55% of the workforce right now is captivated within youth, and being able to connect with youth from earlier age groups so that they can start creating their career pathways and really trying to understand where they fit into the workforce ecosystem as a whole. So within Hamilton Youth Workforce, we started highlighting leadership opportunities, volunteer opportunities. We created an Instagram page. We created a TikTok, which was interesting in itself. Yeah, I know, it was interesting, and it's still growing, but at this point we have about 15 followers on TikTok. And if just as long as we were able to connect with one person, I think that was our ultimate goal. But what we did was, we started highlighting conversations within youth leaders to understand what they're facing and how they are connecting with youth so that we can better understand. And I think that was a big piece within workforce planning, is that we're always the community connectors in a sense. So we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel, but we need to understand what is currently happening within our realm and within our city to be able to connect the dots a little bit more. So within that conversation, we partnered with the City of Hamilton's Youth Department. A lot of the non-for-profit organizations such as Wesley, even ABEA, we had a lot of conversations. Shout out to you guys over there, repping Hamilton. Just being able to get a better understanding of what was currently happening. So within that realm, we were able to have a youth summit where we addressed mental health barriers, where we addressed, the current industries that are growing within the youth realm, and also being able to identify this new wave of entrepreneurship that's happening within the workforce, and being able to have those larger conversations. So that is an always growing program that we are currently facing. But then within that conversation, we are able to understand the different barriers within employment. So we looked at race, which was which is a huge factor right now and always has been within our workforce. Being able to address Black youth, being able to address Indigenous youth, and the skyrocket on how many people are currently facing issues within employment that are based singly on their race and their cultural experience. So within that conversation, we teamed up with McMaster, and we teamed up with the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion that heavily deals with anti-racism, anti-oppression work. And we were able to get youth to be involved in STEM. Because one of the things within this conversation is, where are marginalized individuals within the STEM programs, the scientific backgrounds, the engineerings, right? So it was a larger conversation that started to develop, and within that we had more and more conferences, more committees. Raise up your hand if you've been in more than 10 committees within this year, and you're like, how do they all connect, right? But within these conversations, one little tidbit of information will be able to kind of click moments within your brain to say, this is something that I want to create for myself and for our organization to connect better with the youth that we work with, the individuals we work with, and really being able to expand that. So within McMaster, we had a conversation that led to a workshop where we worked with 100 almost graduated McMaster engineering master's programs. And so we were able to have a larger conversation about the Canadian workforce and how international students really were a connection into the growing economy as a whole. So that was the bigger conversation we had. We did 2 workshops within 2 years. So it was a yearly workshop that we do with McMaster. And we were able to really understand where international students really fit within our workforce ecosystem, and being able to not only give them the understanding of what the Canadian context looks like within workforce, but also being able to bring in their knowledge and their experience from international backgrounds within their workforce, and really being able to mend the two. And I think that's something that employers really need to focus on, is not only being able to address the current culture within your workforce, but also being able to pull ideas and pull knowledge and pull experience from international individuals, newcomers, and really being able to mend the two. It is a growing conversation, and there's so much work that needs to be done. But when we're talking about addressing needs within the workforce, addressing barriers within the workforce, a big piece is to be able to identify what barriers have you created as employers for yourself, and being able to really break that wall down. That way you can better hire, you can better understand your current staffing, and really be able to mesh all of those cultures together to create a better working ecosystem within your organization, your company, and really expand that to a larger outreach for hiring opportunities. So, there's so many things that we were able to talk about, but one of the things that I really wanted to highlight was the Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council and the work that we are currently doing right now with highlighting all of the amazing organizations that are currently working on bettering those practices and breaking down those barriers to employment for marginalized individuals. And one of the pieces that we have is, really being able to bring in newcomers and identify what their current skills are, and being able to match them within an employment realm. And I think there was a big conversation that happened earlier today with one of the panelists was not being a charity case. I think it was you. And that really connected well with me, because I think sometimes we do end up being in this conversation of, is this just, making sure that you're connecting so that you're not labeled as a organization that's just doing the work to really cover your behinds in that sense? Or are you really doing this to not only integrate the work that you're doing, but also better the culture within your organization? So that's something that's ongoing, and that's something that, you know, we need to continuously work on. So one of the pieces that we did and implemented for September as one of our projects and major projects that were ended up being very successful was our EDI training for small to medium enterprises. So one of the pieces within our Employer One survey was, you know, do you have an EDI policy implemented within your organization? 65% of small to medium businesses said, hell no, excuse my French, absolutely not. They said, no, we don't know what that is. We don't know how to begin that conversation. So what we decided to do was invite about 50. We wanted to keep it as small as possible, but so many people were registering for this event. So we capped it at 50 leaders in our community to start that conversation. And it wasn't something where you're like, you're gonna leave today and you're gonna have a whole policy updated and you're gonna do all of these amazing things. You're gonna just start the conversation on what EDI means to you and how to really implement those changes within your organization. So we had about 50 leaders in that conversation, and some of the pieces that we were just able to address is having a land acknowledgement, you know, being able to create your own land acknowledgement and really be able to have that implemented on your website. Gender neutral washrooms. Little things like this can really, really break down those walls into the barriers of employment, and being able to really expand your knowledge on how to better, you know, hire individuals, non-binary individuals, people of color, and women in the workforce is a big piece as well. So it was a larger conversation, and it's always something that is continuously happening. But I think when we talk about barriers into employment, we have this understanding of it's like there's going to be years and years of change that are going to need to happen for this barrier to start going down, and that's not true at all. Within your organization, really be able to pinpoint actual items or actionable items that you're able to really implement today. And that doesn't mean that it has to be grand schemes of things, and which eventually you will work on, but being able to start doing the small things that will be able to really understand how diverse your organization can be is key. So marketing is a big example of that. Even when you're putting out your flyers, who is on those flyers? Who are all these people that you are really trying to showcase? Because a lot of the times, they are the people that represent you. So I think that when you are looking at marketing and you are looking at social media, being able to really implement, you know, people with disabilities, being able to implement people with color, so that the people that you are trying to connect with, which is most of the time marginalized individuals, they will be able to make those connections right away. So these are small actionable items that you can start making now. But when we talk about this idea of addressing barriers to employment, especially within the marginalized groups, look around your community and see what is currently happening. Instead of trying to implement something that's, you know, in your mind new and groundbreaking, it's probably already happening. So being able to really connect the dots about the work that you're currently doing and how it connects to other organizations is always key. So when we were talking about EDI sessions, we were having this conversation about being able to really work towards, you know, creating an EDI policy, but we said HCCI is already doing this. So really being able to connect the dots a little bit more in regards to the work that you're doing and how it connects to the community is going to be key when addressing barriers to employment. On that note, I did see a little sign go up, so I will stop talking and I will pass it over to my panelists.
Thank you. I'm very, very uncomfortable. I'm a short person, and I feel like I'm sitting on a mountaintop. If you don't mind, I use my hands a lot, and I feel like, so I'm just going to stand for it. Feel that. But thank you for indulging me. So my name is Tapo. I've been in Canada since I think 2001. I came here as a refugee, as an immigrant. And my journey has been not interesting, rather painful, rather traumatic, rather difficult and challenging, which a lot of people, when they see the doctor part, think like, well, okay, but you made it, you're good, you're strong, you're inspiring, you're all of this. And what I want to talk about is just sharing some of my experiences. I came as a youth, to Canada, I unfortunately don't fit in that category anymore, the 20 years. But I think my experiences are things that we still see happening to a lot of young people, not just immigrants, not just asylum seekers or refugees, but even young people born in this country. When we talk about marginalization, we as a society have kind of just collectively figured out what that is, but in our figuring out, we have stopped listening to the actual stories that lead to marginalization and the actual experiences that people have to go through to get to the Dr. Tapo, right? So when I came, like I said, I was a youth. I went through the refugee process. That was fairly easy. Thank goodness it's not for a lot of people. But at some point, I thought to myself, now what am I going to do? I didn't have family here. I didn't have a network here. I didn't know anybody here. It was a new country, new culture, new everything. So I'll get up in the morning, I'll go to the public library, sit at a computer, because I didn't have one at home, and try and figure out the education system. So I started doing my research. I figured out, okay, with the education that I have from my country, because I didn't do high school here, it'll be easier for me to get into a community college rather than a university. So I started looking at community colleges. What do they offer? And in my navigation, I figured out, okay, Black women, we seem to be accepted more in certain fields and programs. So I settled on social services work or child and youth work. Again, nobody was telling me anything. So I sat at that library computer in Hamilton, and I applied to Mobile College for child and youth work and social services. I was rejected from social services. I was accepted into child and youth work. During that period of my studies, I was the only Black woman in my cohort. A lot of my classmates were fresh from high school. They would not talk to me. When I spoke to them, they would not look at me. They would not respond to me. I was very, very isolated. Within the first term of my time at Mobile College, I was diagnosed with depression. But I had to keep going. My first placement was at a school that was, if anyone's familiar with Hamilton, it was at Prince Wales School. At the time, I lived on Upper James, all the way up the mountain and like way out. To get to Prince of Wales School, I would have to take 2 buses. That meant I would have to leave my home by 5:45 a.m. In the winter, it was dark, it was cold, it was scary. And the area I lived didn't have many houses, so sometimes I'm walking past this just wide field of snow, which I was grateful for, because if anything was coming at me, I would see it because of the snow. So I tried to do this for about 2 weeks, and at some point I got tired. I got tired of waking up, because if I'm at the bus stop by 5:45, what time do I have to wake up, right? When I was being placed at this school, nobody asked me about my transportation, where I lived, would this be the best placement for me? So in my struggles, I would wake up in the morning, try and get to that bus stop by 5:45. If I miss it, I'm late. And a number of times I didn't miss it. And during the mornings when I did miss it, I would be an hour and a half late for placement, during which my supervisor would hear from my classmates that I wasn't doing much, I wasn't pulling my weight, I wasn't really contributing in a meaningful way. So one day I'm late, I walk in and he basically rips me a new one, as North Americans would say. And I was shocked. I did not understand, what is going on? What is this? And I tried to explain the situation to him. I live all the way up there. To get here, I need 2 buses. If I miss even 1 bus, I'm going to be late. there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. I try to explain. When I talk to them, they don't even look at me. They don't respond to me. I've tried to work with them. And you know, college, there's a lot of group work involved. But you need to be in groups where people want to work with you. And they did not. And his response was, you can't blame everything. The answer is within you. And to this day, that rings in my head. The answer is within me? Like how? And I did ask him, like, I don't understand, what do you mean? And he said, stop asking questions. Figure it out if you want to graduate. So it was my first placement, I was first year. It was one of those accelerated programs. So I was like, okay, I will figure it out. And so I happened to be somebody who has a little bit of artistic talent. If you show me an animated picture, I can probably reproduce it. So I was working at Prince of Wales with grades, I think it was 1, 2, and 3. And since nobody else wanted to work with me, I would sit down with the kids and start drawing with them and chatting with them and all of that. And Easter was just around the corner. And so my classmates noticed, oh, she's doing really well with the little people. And she's great at drawing. So they started talking to me. Because they had this marvelous idea that I'll draw a big bunny so people could take pictures with the Easter bunny. I did it. It didn't really change much, because as soon as that Easter event was done, we went back to the status quo. And I'm bringing this up because when we talk about marginalized and intersectionality as well, it's not just about a person's race, it's not just about their gender, but it's also about their environment and their teammates, which is why EDI is so important. And in a lot of organizations, like Khadija says, the work has not been done yet. And yet a lot of organizations want to hire diversity, want to bring in newcomers and all of that, and you're bringing them in often traumatic environments. Fast forward 2014, I'm about to finish my PhD. I get a teaching job in Leeds, UK, at a university there. And my experience there was very similar to what I experienced years before as a youth trying to break into education and career and all of that. It was so bad that I decided, you know what, forget this, I'm going back to Canada. I went to the vice provost, I sat down with her, and I said, like, listen, when they hired me, they hired 14 other people, and they hired as diversity as they could. They paid for me to move from Canada to the UK. They hired Italians, they hired, I think she was Polish. They just went all out because we need to increase the diversity in our organization. By the time I left, 6 had already left. A year later, 13 out of the 14 had left. Because we were being brought into an environment where people wouldn't talk to us, people didn't want to know us, and as long as they knew what we could do, that was about the end of our contact and interaction with our colleagues. This isn't just the students, but it's with colleagues. And so when we start to think about youth, so Future Black Female, we work with young people 16 to 22, we're a youth employer, which means IW1, who's again not youth anymore, on my staff, lots of young people. And some of them are immigrants, came as international students. Some of them spent 2 or 3 years in university learning remotely because of COVID. They didn't get any practical experience. They learned to work on their own. They learned to do work, climb on the bed, or whatever it is. Now they're in the workforce and we haven't prepared our spaces for them. And so it's not just people of color, it's not just women, it's not just people with disabilities, it's our Gen Z, right? I've read a number of articles, one that said 70% of employers have fired a Gen Z within 3 months of employment. And the main reason why these employers were saying they're too sensitive, they get anxious and emotional about everything. I feel like I have to step on eggshells when I'm working with this young person. And this is just generally youth. Forget their gender, forget their race, and it's just young people who had to go through a significant part of their education in isolation. But have we done the work? We were talking earlier, for us, what we're seeing is a lot of young people don't have the soft skills for the workforce. Simple things. I was explaining, I have to do workaround. You don't start a professional email with hey, exclamation, and smiley face. You don't dress a certain way to go to work. When I speak to you about something, I'm not saying you're a terrible employee, I'm not saying you're a failure, I'm not saying all these things. What I am saying is work needs to be done. So a lot of hand-holding, which can, from an employer perspective, be emotionally exhausting. It is. It absolutely is. And it can be frustrating and all of that. But when we're thinking about inclusion, we have to think, where are these young people coming from, what they have experienced, and what they did not have access to due to the pandemic. And then when you look at people of color, we have international students who arrived during the pandemic, graduated during the pandemic. They don't have networks, they don't know anyone, they want to stay in Canada, they enter the job force. I was speaking to some of my employees and they were talking about, they didn't know there was a career zone at Brock University. They do know. They don't know what supports are on campus. They don't know what supports are in the community. So we need to do that work, like Khadija was saying, in reaching out to them and making these supports available. But what it really comes down to is what kind of environment and culture are we bringing young people into? And here, like I said, I'm talking about the whole young people because I talk to colleagues, and it doesn't matter their race or gender, our Gen Zs are struggling in the workforce. They are struggling. And we along with them because we're getting frustrated. Because when you hire somebody who has a degree, we expect them to be at a certain, and they just don't have those soft skills. So some of the work that we need to do is in figuring out how do we hold their hand without losing our minds. And we do need to hold their hand. We absolutely do. And then we also need to have clear expectations of them. I've had young people that have quit on me. Just yesterday, one of them quit because I had expectations and they were different from hers. But I gave her that choice. You either come to work on time or you need to make some decisions. You don't just not turn up to work. You at least have to tell me I'm sick, I'm taking the day off, whatever it is. You don't ghost your employer. And a lot of them do. They believe in quiet quitting, which means you're expecting them to be productive and they're expecting this is a job where I can just, right? So expectations in themselves are different right now. But we can't then take that stance and reject them completely, right? It's a whole generation. It's a whole generation. And we need to do the work. We absolutely need to do the work. I need to do the work. Last week I had to ask my staff, do I ever make you feel stupid when I talk to you? Because that has come up in the past with another employee. Like, let me know. Because to me, I'm thinking and I read this thing about us Gen Xers, that apparently our humor is very dry, very Jerry Seinfeld-like, and the Gen Z just don't get it. They don't get it. So when we bring our humor, to them it's offensive. That's Gen X. And then there's the whole thing with the boomers versus Gen X. There's cultural wars happening in our workplaces. And we need to be aware and do something about it. We need to. So I asked her, do I at any time make you feel stupid when I talk to you? And how do I do that? And one of them was brave enough to say, not anymore. And I said, okay, so what was I saying or doing that would make you feel that I might think you're stupid? And she said, well, sometimes when I'm talking to you, you're making faces. I'm like, okay. And she's like, just like that, you do that a lot, right? But for me, it means I need to be more aware of my body language. And I need to learn from them what they expect and correct them where they're wrong, but we need to do the work. And once we start doing that work for Gen Z, we start doing that work for marginalized employees, I think we have a better chance of retaining people, but also of building the kinds of cultures and workplaces we can be proud of and enjoy ourselves.